guys a minute. Okay, hi everybody. When you guys are walking over, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Rob Mitchell, and I have a Bitcoin podcast on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network called The Bitcoin Game. I'm just going to quickly ask, out of curiosity, a few questions. And I don't know if I missed this with the first speaker, but how many people here are pretty new to Bitcoin? If you could raise your hand. Is anybody? A few people? Okay, great. And how many people feel they're very involved in Bitcoin here? Okay. So a few more people in that camp, and I guess everyone else is kind of in the middle. So I'm basically a non-technical Bitcoin enthusiast, and in my podcast, I just ask kind of basic questions, but for anyone who's interested in Bitcoin, I really recommend you, and you like to learn by listening to podcasts, check out letstalkbitcoin.com. There's about a half dozen different shows, and the flagship Let's Talk Bitcoin is really very good in digging deep in a lot of subjects. So our next panel is about regulation. The moderator is Matthew Gertler, who works at the Digital Security Council, and that's a group that helps professionals in both legal and accounting professions deal with digital currency type issues. So we have two pretty prominent people in the cryptocurrency legal field. We've got Andrew Beal and Brian Klein, and I find these types of talks to be a lot more interesting than you might think at first glance, so I'm really looking forward to this. Come on out, guys.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Welcome back, everyone. We are at the Regulation, Security, and Law panel. I hope you had a good break. Today we have with us three foremost experts in digital currency regulation out there right now. So from left to right, we have Andy Beal. Andy is an associate at Crowley Corporate Attorneys. He, in addition to providing general corporate counsel to emerging technology companies, he advises virtual currency companies on state and federal regulations, securities issues relating to advertising and sale of digital assets, and compliance with the Bank Secrecy Act. He's also a mentor at the Plug and Play Bitcoin Center in Silicon Valley. Next, we have Brian Klein, who's a partner at Baker Markard.
Good morning.
And he's an accomplished trial attorney who has successfully litigated in federal and state court. His practice focuses on high-stakes criminal and regulatory defense and civil litigation. He's the former volunteer outside general counsel for the Bitcoin Foundation and teaches a criminal practice seminar at USC, Field School of Law. And lastly, we have Scott Bambasino.
That's correct.
VP of Worldwide Sales at AlphaPoint. AlphaPoint is a financial tech software company that provides white label digital currency exchange solutions to partners that want to offer their own exchange services but lack the resources to do it on their own. It's located in New York, so he's intimately been involved with the New York Bit License and other FinCEN regulations. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the law, I want our panelists to first say how they first got into Bitcoin and why they chose to make it such a big part of their career.
I'll go ahead and start. I attended a startup weekend event. Has anybody else been to one of those before? Okay. So I did one about 2.5 years ago, and a gentleman that I was on a team with ended up starting an exchange. And so just by being around him through osmosis, I sort of got more interested in it and more knowledgeable about it. And at the time, there weren't a lot of attorneys focusing on that space. And as a young attorney, that liked dealing with startups, it seemed like a great opportunity. And the more I got involved, the more I got hooked. So.
And I'm a former federal prosecutor, and I had just left the U.S. Attorney's Office. I had worked here for 5 years And I read about FinCEN regulating virtual currency, and I thought, or Bitcoin. It really was focused on Bitcoin. I thought, wow, if they're regulating it, there must be something to this, sort of like. So I read more about it, and then I ended up going to the Bitcoin Foundation's first conference, which was in San Jose a couple of years ago. And I distinctly remember this. I don't know, did anyone here go to that conference? Yeah, so if you may remember, it was like next door to like the anime convention. And I remember walking in, and I wasn't sure which convention I had gone to. And I thought, this is really cool and amazing. And since then, I've been hooked.
Excellent, great. How about this mic stand setup? This is great. Every time I'm on a panel, there's no mic stand, so I feel like a musician here.
Your hands free.
Yeah, hands-free now. That's good. I'm Italian. I speak with my hands, so this will be very useful. So my name's Scott. I'm a VP of Sales for Alpha Point, and like the introduction said, we power exchanges. So the reason, or how I got started, is I actually spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and then I stepped away from it, and I started a couple businesses that were completely unrelated to tech. And then about 4 years later, I really wanted to get back into tech. I was really missing the energy and being surrounded by some of the best and brightest people. So I started exploring where I wanted to go back. And so I was looking at different segments of the industry, big data, a few others, and then I came across Bitcoin. And I was fascinated. The more I read, the more I watched, the more I learned. I was like, yeah, this is where I want to be. So it was actually by happenstance, I go to an annual Christmas party in my neighborhood, and in 2012 I met a gentleman, and we didn't get to know each other so well, but then I saw him again in 2013. I was like, hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's up? What's new? And he goes, oh, I founded this new company. And I said, great, what are you doing? He's like, oh, it's in Bitcoin. I said, let's talk. And one thing led to another. And I joined the team and started in 2014. I've been with them ever since.
Wonderful. So let's start off with sort of the federal regulations before going down to more state and security issues. So I'd like to open up for the panelists. What are sort of the requirements for Bitcoin companies at the federal level? And how might this change depending on whether you're a company or maybe a miner?
I'll take a crack at that one first. So I guess to back up and just sort of present the landscape to you guys. So Matt asked about federal level regulation, which is more geared towards sort of protecting the integrity of the financial system as a whole. So they're worried about money laundering in particular, who's using your service, how they're using your service, and sort of in what dollar amounts they're using your service. And then the states are focused on sort of protecting the consumers that live in their states, so making sure that their money is safe. So two very different sort of concerns. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Well, let's first go down through what the requirements are on money services businesses. For you guys that don't know, we'll be using the phrase FinCEN as the Financial Crime Enforcement Network. It's responsible for regulating money transmitters and other money service businesses. Can you sort of go in what the requirements are on that, them, and then how it might change for the individuals?
Sure. So generally, FinCEN is interested in folks that do business in this space and making the distinction between somebody that might just be like recreationally involved, so mining recreationally for your own personal benefit versus having a huge mining operation for the benefit of others, or buying and selling Bitcoins for yourself versus buying and selling Bitcoins for the public as a business. So that's a big distinction too, and FinCEN obviously cares about the business activities in a business capacity. So if you're a money service business, and to give you sort of a non-Bitcoin example of what that might be, any other money transmitter out there, so companies like Western Union and MoneyGram that accept money from a customer with the intention of sort of moving it somewhere else, right? Either to another person in the US or to somebody that may be in another country. And FinCEN is interested in companies or people that perform that sort of activity, and so they need to register with them. And doing that means you need a couple things. One is a anti-money laundering policy. And it's going to just establish controls and procedures that you and your employees, staff need to follow, right? What sort of information you collect from the people you do business with, what dollar amounts you allow them to do business with you. You need to appoint a compliance officer, ideally one that has compliance experience, which I know in this particular space is something that a lot of companies struggle with. And you need to, there are reporting and recording requirements too, so you need to record transactions, you need to report certain transactions that look suspicious, and that's sort of as deep down the rabbit hole as I'm going to go on the specifics.
And I would just jump in and say, I don't do this same type of work that Andy does. So Andy does what I would call regulatory compliance work. He helps entrepreneurs and startups understand the legal lay of the land and advise them on sort of the proper procedures and how to set things up. And I come in more often if someone's gotten in trouble or at least being scrutinized by the government. So one thing to keep in mind, I would say two things to keep in mind. Not every business model that is in Bitcoin has FinCEN requirements. There's plenty of types of businesses you could launch that aren't covered by FinCEN's regulations. But if you are, you need to take them very, very seriously because the government is very interested in making sure and very focused on Bitcoin companies. I, for example, represent an individual now who's been charged with the 1960 violation, which is the violation, criminal violation, if you don't follow the proper FinCEN regulations. Okay, so if you don't register with FinCEN, you have to actually register with FinCEN. And that, just not even registering, if you're covered by them or if the government believes you're covered by their regulations, that in itself is a crime. And it doesn't matter, the government would argue, I would dispute this somewhat, but what your intent was and why you didn't register may not matter, okay? So it's really important that you consult. I'm not saying this because I'm a lawyer, although I kind of am, but I don't do this work, so I don't benefit from it, but it is really important that you consult with legal counsel at the outset of your business model and see whether you fall under these regulations, because the federal government takes it very seriously. There are prosecutors around the country who are very focused on this. I mean, I think we saw there's been a number of recent criminal charges in this space, including some of the officers who investigated Silk Road. So I think it's, that would be my 2 bits on this area.
Sure, and I'll jump in here. So as a technology provider, we're not an exchange. Our clients are the exchange. They're the exchange operators. And on that side of the equation, there's a few things they need to manage. And I always tell them the first thing that comes out of my mouth is regulatory compliance challenges. Know what's expected of you and be able to fulfill it. Just like with any business, you need to build a team. And one of the people on your team needs to be somebody like one of these 2 gentlemen here who can navigate the regulatory and compliance challenges that you're going to face. Picking up on what he said, I was in Austin just a couple weeks ago at a Bitcoin conference there, and there was some FinCEN people on a panel, and a gentleman from the audience got up, stood at the microphone, and introduced himself to the gentleman sitting on the stage. He goes, well, we've never met face-to-face before, but you shut me down. And the gentleman in the audience was saying, there was no complaints, nobody's lost any money, why would you shut me down? And the FinCEN gentleman said, you didn't register. And just the act of not registering alone, like he was saying, was enough to shut him down. So as a business owner, it's imperative to get counsel, know what's expected of you in the regions and jurisdictions that you plan to operate in.
And I would say this, FinCEN they've been very good about communicating with the community, and issuing guidance, and trying to understand Bitcoin. I think there's a high level of knowledge at FinCEN in terms of about how Bitcoin works, what some of the challenges are, and they're not interested in stopping, they would say for sure, they're not interested in stopping innovation. They just want to see responsible innovation in their area, which means they don't want people laundering money, they want to protect certain other things. And there is lots of ways, obviously, to be a responsible entrepreneur, and I think it's important that people sort of, if you're in the space and you're covered by the regulations, you have to follow them.
I'd also add that FinCEN has a hotline too, and so if whether you're an attorney or whether you're an entrepreneur that has a company that has a business model that may or may not qualify as a money service business, they have a task force or a virtual currency team that will field questions from the community, and they're extremely responsive. And they'll, respond to a question or an analysis on a business model within a day or two. And I use that all the time, and I find it really helpful. And everyone there at the office is extremely knowledgeable, so that's a good resource too.
Now that we've sort of gone through the federal landscape, I'd like to sort of move down into the state regulations. New York is probably the one that everyone here is most familiar with. They're the first state to try and regulate virtual currencies. Can you go into a little bit of how they're trying to do this and how might this change, and how might other states be looking at it differently?
So, New York, states sort of fall into two boxes. The majority of states are trying to clarify how their existing laws apply to virtual currency, and New York and as of recently California are going the opposite direction and trying to create something new. So there's sort of an interesting dynamic between clarifying and creating there. And I think the bit license has a lot of the similar components that other state money transmitter laws have, but it also addresses some of the unique issues that you have to deal with, some of the unique, risks that are inherent to virtual currency. Anybody who reads the news is very aware that exchanges and wallets get hacked a lot, and so there are a lot of securities concerns there. But there's protecting customer funds is sort of the state's mantra anyway, and so they're intimately interested in companies that are holding funds for customers. And I think the bit license, in addition to doing a lot of the things that existing money transmitter laws do, it also wants to make sure that you have people on staff that can adequately protect funds that you hold. They want you to do periodic penetration testing. They want you to have reserves. So if I'm holding X amount of dollars in customer funds, they want to make sure that if those go missing, that I can cover that loss somehow. So there's all sorts of things that are very, very unique to the virtual currency space, and I think New York is trying to address some of those, which is good.
And I think, I don't follow as intimately as probably Andy does, but I think they're about to announce their final rules very soon. At least they said they are. And they've obviously gotten tremendous industry feedback as well as broader financial industry feedback on it. And so I think it will be very interesting to see what they ultimately do, because New York is the financial capital of this country and argue the world. And so obviously what they do is going to have a tremendous impact on all Bitcoin providers. And at first, I think the regulations were so overreaching. I think Satoshi would have had to register for a bit license, and they've sort of dialed that back. They've been slowly dialing things back, but who knows where it will end up.
Yeah, and from a business entrepreneur perspective, nobody wants to be regulated, but regulators want to regulate. And it's interesting. When the internet first came out, what if you had to get a license to put a website up? It completely stifled everything, right? And that's kind of where we are right now, is if you want to be an entrepreneur and go out and create a business, they want to put these barriers, these really high, expensive barriers to entry up. And so it's always a give and take between protecting and not stifling innovation. And so I don't think there's, these guys know more about it than I do. I just see it more from a business perspective, and you got to be able to deal with it.
And the other thing I would add, just in general with the state licensing procedure, again, I don't help do that kind of work, but I see it on the back end when people get scrutinized. You can actually be prosecuted federally for not having a state license that you need to have, which sort of seems counterintuitive. You think, I would be prosecuted by the state if I somehow screwed this up or violated the licensing procedures. But actually, the federal law, this 1960 law, which can get you if you don't register with FinCEN and you don't do certain things you're supposed to do also, they also can get you for not registering with the state, which creates a lot of problems on some level, because a lot of the states aren't even taking license applications, or they're taking them, they're not responding. And I think federal prosecutors are aware of that and have some understanding of that. But unfortunately, we're in this really, the world for Bitcoin is a lot of flux right now. I mean, FinCEN's done, I'd say, a good job of letting everyone know what their regulations are, what their guidance is. But it's really at the state level where there's the most unknowns. You know, some states aren't taking applications, some states don't respond, some states are trying to develop a new procedure and they're not accepting anything during that time period. So it's a really tumultuous world, and I think it goes to his point, which is it's hard to be an entrepreneur when there's so many unknowns. You also have layered on top of all your other unknowns, like, is my business model good? Am I going to be able to get customers? If you know, do I have the right product? Then you also got, where do I need to register? How do I do that? And you have all the attorney's fees. It is quite expensive to retain counsel to register in all the states if you need to. So I always say, like, you know, you can get a business model that doesn't fall under this. You want to develop some sort of blockchain technology or a software product. There's a lot of great Bitcoin products. I think a lot of people would argue Bitcoin little b, the one we use as currency, is like the first application. But I'm sure there's going to be a lot of applications out there that aren't going to fall under FinCEN and state regulations. And those are some of the exciting things people are trying to build. Andy?
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Well, considering that a lot of the regulation within the states are in flux, have there been instances of states going after companies before really there's any clarity of what they should be doing?
Well, I know, for example, the foundation itself received a letter from California. People may have heard of this. This was back in 2013. It said, hey, you're violating California money transmitter laws because you're a money transmitter. And the foundation, through legal counsel, wrote a very forceful letter back that said, we're a nonprofit, we're not a money transmitter, your regulations don't cover us, and never heard from California again. So the states obviously do things, they send out letters. I'm not as aware of that as probably Andy is, but I know, depending on the state, they're more active than other states.
Yeah, without going into specific companies or specific states, I know there are a few states that are confident enough in sort of their interpretation of what their laws are to go after a mining operation or a Bitcoin ATM operator. And so I know there are some small instances of that. So.
And there's also, Florida, this is one that's been publicly announced. Florida actually has very strict money transmitter laws, very, very strict. And they had a task force, and they charged 2 people who were using local Bitcoins to buy and sell Bitcoins. And actually the agents were at a conference, so if there's any agents here, hello. And that's where they did, I think, some of the dealings even. So different states have different levels of activity and enforcement. I would say Florida, from what I know, is one of the more stringent ones.
I'd also point out, just so you guys sort of, I think you probably have a good idea of what FinCEN looks like. They're a big office underneath the Department of Treasury. But state money transmitter offices are usually like a division of the state banking office, or the Department of Financial Institutions, as it's called in California. And depending on how big the state is and how big their budget is, you may have a money transmitter office that has 2 people in it, and they have.
They're probably asleep until Bitcoin arrived.
And they have
there was just banking for the last 50 years.
Yeah, and they have all their existing work, and then they're trying to learn about this new technology, and then try and police that industry in their state. And it's really hard. So I think if any company out there is frustrated by how slow states are moving, just understand what sort of resources and they're working with and how many directions they're being pulled, and account for that when you're trying to figure out sort of your timeline of getting regulatory clarity for your business. So,
and then obviously there's lots of other business models that may be covered by other federal and state laws. I mean, if you had sort of a commodities-driven business, the CFTC may cover you on a federal level. The SEC may cover your business model. Maybe other state regulations, same thing. So you just kind of, again, not just because I'm a lawyer, but it really is helpful to go to a lawyer at the outset, get some good advice, explain what your business model is, and see where the areas are where you might have to deal with some legal concerns so that you can address them responsibly and do things right, and therefore you won't hopefully come under scrutiny. Or if you do, you'll be able to, respond to it and let the regulators know that you're doing everything right, and they'll go away. So I think it is really important at the very outset of your business to engage with counsel, and it doesn't have to cost a ton of money just to run your business idea by somebody and get some initial thoughts and feedback. And then you can decide what you want to do.
And on the opposite end of Florida, I talk to a lot of people all day long. I hear that Texas is much more hands-off, laissez-faire. So there's quite a few Bitcoin companies in Texas, and everybody that I know and talk to there, they keep trying to recruit everybody to Texas. Get out of New York, get out of California, come to Texas. So if you're an entrepreneur looking to start a business, you may want to look to Texas.
Sure. Just a quick question. In terms of the actual money service licensing process, I mean, doing it now for the past few years and doing every state with some different companies, it really is quite the art form to actually do the state by state by state. And just one bit of advice that I'd like to say is to target the states with 8 million people or more. So the more the population is per state, the harder it's going to be. So focus on those states more, and then you'll probably be in a better position. But it really is an art form. I mean, it takes a lot of different moving parts to make that really work. Some companies can spend 3 years doing it. Other companies can spend 12 months doing it. So it really is quite, who you get involved, how well you want to stay on top of things. But the more, the bigger the state's population is, the harder it's going to be, from my experience. Now, another question, sorry.
That was your question.
What's your position on the new net neutrality rulings, and how does that affect the money service state by state that you're seeing if they don't have physical limitations?
I'm not knowledgeable enough about it to answer that.
And I don't know. But I think you raise a good point about the states, and I think obviously everyone knows about Coinbase, and I think if you looked at when they've rolled out things, they'll show a map of where the states where they can do business in, and it's pretty clear they're targeting certain states, right? They have California and Texas, I think I remember the map correctly. So yeah, there is ways. You don't have to just all of a sudden wait to open your business with all 50 states. You may need to do things to make sure that you're not doing business in those states, like geo-block and take a number of steps. So maybe you want to roll out in Texas first, but you've got to make sure you don't roll out in the other 49 states, right? So there's a lot of steps you might have to take. So there is a targeted approach you can take to roll out your business if you're covered by these regulations, and that's sort of like the big question. If you're not, you don't have to worry about that. But that sometimes is an expensive question to get answered.
Yes. Quick question. On a global scale, what jurisdictions do you guys see as being the most receptive to Bitcoin businesses?
I think the UK is very receptive. Bolivia is not, because they banned Bitcoin. It's illegal there. So don't set up your business in Bolivia. But I think the UK is. I think most of the countries actually have been very quiet to some degree. I think the Netherlands is supposed to be very friendly. Germany was for a while, and now it's not so much. The thing about Europe is the way it's set up. It's almost like a bunch of states, so you can teleport. That's the word that lawyers use there. You can sort of passport. So you don't even know teleport. It's like Star Wars. Star Trek. You can passport your license through other countries, but there's ways to do that. So I think Europe overall is fairly open and friendly. And then I would say Japan seems to be very friendly. I mean, they had sort of the Mt. Gox debacle, but they haven't responded by shutting down all Bitcoin companies, and they've sort of said the opposite thing, actually. So I think you've got to think about that too. I mean, because Bitcoin is meant to be a global tool, right? I mean, you open a website, the whole world can see it. The other thing you should think about too is it doesn't just help you to like move abroad and say like, oh, well, I'm in, name a country, Colombia, and I put a website up there for I'm not covered by US laws, but I'm in Colombia. No, if US customers and US banks and US people and companies can access your website, geo-block and do a number of steps, you are probably covered by a lot of the same US laws. It all depends, so you really need to think about this no matter where you locate your business about the US, because I will say this, the US is definitely the strongest enforcer of these laws globally, is all the laws. Because we have the most resources and we direct the most of it. But really the US really does act as the world's policeman on the front of Bitcoin.
And the companies that don't want to be disrupted most are here too, so that has a little something to do with it. To his question, what geographic regions are most friendly? There's a great resource online. It's called merkletree.io, merkletree.io. And if you go there, they've done a great job of keeping up to date on the geopolitical situation with regards to Bitcoin. So some places like Australia are very permissive. They don't have a problem with it. He mentioned Japan, very similar. I have been speaking with some people in certain parts of the world. I won't name the places just out of respect for their privacy, but they are talking to the highest levels of government, the ministers of finance and things like that. And the feedback is that in some of these smaller countries and regions, they really do want to do what's best for their people. And so when they learn about Bitcoin and they learn about remittances and how their people are going abroad and sending money back home and the expense of that, and how that money represents a significant portion of that country's GDP, and if more of that money can get back to that country, those politicians appreciate what that means for their economy and their people, and they really do care about their people, apparently. They get very excited about Bitcoin, and they are looking to the entrepreneurs to say, well, you tell us what you need, you help shape the regulation, and we'll make it easier for you to do business. So it is evolving, and certain places are definitely more interested. And yeah, so I'll just leave it at that.
I'd echo what Scott said about Australia, and not only because the government has been pretty flexible there with companies, but because their mobile payments, it's really advanced there. The U.S. is sort of lagged behind the rest of the world with mobile payments, but I heard a stat, I don't know if this is true or not, but that
You should definitely spread it then.
Yeah, we're going to speak. But that 50% of consumer transactions in Australia next year are going to be like via a tap and go or through a phone. And I've never done a tap and go payment, and I've never done a mobile payment in a mobile transaction in person at like at a grocery store or something like that. I've always been cash or credit card. From that standpoint, I think Australia is a really interesting place to pursue business.
The tax in Australia is very high. That's the only problem right now. So that's why companies are moving to the UK, because there's no tax. So that's the only, yes, Australia is great and it's wonderful and they love crypto companies, but they will tax them a lot. So the margin and the actual ability for the companies to make money is irrelevant.
And that's a concern in the US too, obviously, how the tax regime looks at Bitcoin.
You want to go into that a little bit?
Not really, but
It's
we
nice
just
when
passed
you
April
do our
15th,
taxes,
so
right? Yeah.
I don't want to think about it for another year.
Fair enough.
As money transmitting is interpreted differently between every single state in the U.S., do you see a model in which there could be a marriage between the federal government and the states, in which something is kind of constructed together? Is NYDFS working on something like that, or what are the barriers?
That would be great. I think a lot of people in the industry would love to see sort of a uniform rule, not teleporting, but passporting your license from one state to the other, because it would seem to make sense. Like, it's a crazy patchwork of 48 states that require licenses and 2 that don't. I think it's Montana and South Carolina don't. So that would be great. And I think the way our system's set up, unfortunately, with states and the federal government, you've got so many actors that are competing for their own interests. You have the head of DFS in New York who has made a big deal about what he's doing, and I would imagine probably FinCEN, views it as somewhat disruptive because he's asking actually for another layer of AML on top of what FinCEN does, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, or at least they originally were. So I think it would be great, but I don't know if those conversations are I don't know if it will be in our lifetime before we could see that. That's the way I would put it.
Yeah, and these guys are, it's about self-preservation and justification, and, they want to add value from their perspective. And so the idea that they would say, hey, let's simplify this, make it easier and less cumbersome, is kind of works against their own self-interest that, hey, this gives me more work to do and therefore I can stick around and, look at all this great value that I'm adding, right?
But I think California may be a counterpoint to New York. I'm hoping it will be, where the licensing procedures will allow a lot more innovation, be a lot less onerous. And obviously, companies do go like to Texas or somewhere where it's easier to set up a business, where it's cheaper, where the rules are a lot less onerous to comply with.
Yeah, I would add that there are a couple groups out there. I think CSBS is one of them, and Conference of State Banking Commissioners, and they've sort of drafted, I think, or coming out with sort of a model framework, regulatory framework. And I know at least some states are actually waiting on that framework to come out and are going to sort of use that as a guide, which is interesting. But I know, this is not this industry is not unique in that it's, national or interstate. I mean, insurance is like that. There's a lot of different industries that are like that, and insurance is regulated in every state too. And the only way that State Farm is able sort of to sell the same products in each state, or solicit customers or producers the same way, is that there are a lot of associations and groups that try and assist states in developing some consensus too. And I know there are huge organizations that do that, particularly in insurance, and their job is to sort of, corral all these insurance commissioners and offices and make sure that, it actually, from a business standpoint, it's easy to go from California to Nevada to Colorado. So.
And if you guys are interested in learning more about this and learning more about the people who are actually fighting on behalf of Bitcoin at the state and federal level, there's a woman named Perry Ann Boring. She's done a great job from my perspective in reaching out and working within the system to make sure that the regulations aren't too onerous, and doing a lot of education. Because a lot of this is education, especially like these gentlemen have mentioned with the first iterations of the bit license. If you read through that, there are some points in there that it's like they don't understand Bitcoin at all. I mean, they don't get it. When some of the things they were requiring, to know who the counterparty is and some of these things, it's just like, wow, they literally don't get it. So back to, working within the system, you guys might look up Perry Ann Boring. She's done a great job working within the system as a consultant at the federal level, and I believe other levels as well.
Yeah, and there's questions.
Is it possible to be considered a money transmitter if you don't interface with the physical world other than your computers and the infrastructure of the internet?
That's the net neutrality I was talking about. Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I was curious what the net neutrality tie-in was, but we didn't circle back. So you mentioned that this is the first time I've heard net neutrality mentioned in the context of Bitcoin and how it affects regulation and what's expected of you. And then this gentleman in the back, he mentioned something about machine to machine. So maybe you guys can give me a little more insight into what you're thinking about.
Well, say if you make a colored coin on a blockchain or something, and you offer to exchange them for another token or whatever at whatever rate you choose, and you never interface with the banking system, you never interface with physical dollars, never anything except for computers and software and infrastructure and internet. Could you be considered a money transmitter?
So my understanding is, look, I'm not a lawyer. Let's just get that straight. I think when you start to deal with fiat currencies, US dollars and things of that, you clearly crossed a line. So if somebody is giving you US dollars, you're depositing that into a custodial account, and then you're enabling somebody to transact between digital and fiat, you're clearly working with money. I have spoke with people who want to have clearly a digital exchange, where you're just going from Litecoin to Bitcoin to Doge or Dark or whatever, and they're never dealing with fiat. And Perhaps the gentleman to my right here can comment a little bit more about, when you don't incorporate fiat, how does that change things?
And I mean, I don't give that type of advice, and I don't fully, because I'm not an expert in that area, but I think Andy is probably the person who will have hopefully some insights.
Yeah, I don't want to give a legal analysis of the business model up here without knowing more, but I think,
It's an asset, right? It's an asset.
well, I think you can essentially tokenize anything. You can tokenize a coupon. You can tokenize a physical asset. You can tokenize a coin currency. A token can represent just about anything. So I think a lot of it depends on what the token is redeemable for. I know that's a question that we sort of try and answer a lot. But I think if you ask, I think it will depend on who you talk to. I think if you talk to a state, all they're going to want to know is is a customer's money at risk, and there are a lot of things that can get lumped in that box. And I think on the federal level, they're absolutely interested in whether or not someone can use your system to move illicit funds through, right, or launder, or somebody that may not be able to sort of interact with the traditional financial system. Can they use your financial system as a substitute, right? Because they've been blocked from dealing with banks or things like that. So I think that's a good place to start generally. I think so.
It seems like that covers everything.
It can, yeah.
Does Ripple have money service licenses? No, correct?
Nope.
That's a bit of a it's strange to analyze. Obviously the money never moves in your model. So if that's the case and you just keep it in one framework, but you're still interacting with it.
I think, and you can make the same argument with Bitcoin too, right? You don't have, there are no digital coins moving back and forth. You're just assigning the ability to access
You're just moving the
that space on the chain to someone else, right? So.
We're running out of time, so this lady right here had one more question, I think. Are you? No?
Actually, it was answered.
Oh, perfect. One more question before we end?
I was wondering what the attitude of, and I guess the level of understanding of FinCEN and other regulatory organizations was toward a system that could create Bitcoin and other blockchain technologies, where many parties have the opportunity to optionally participate as a member of a transaction, and how that extends to money transmitter regulations. Like if 400 people can sign up on a transaction, how does that relate to? Do they know what that kind of thing means, that it's possible?
Yeah, I think, I guess to sum up sort of that example, you can talk, a good phrase would be distributed control.
Sure.
And I think, you can make the same argument. You can make the same argument that multi-signature technology accomplishes the same thing. And I'm of the opinion that, and I'm sure lots of other people agree too, that there is technology that can fix, a regulatory question for a company. I think you can employ technology that can distribute control and remove risk, remove company risk, and you can, that may be your solution to sort of get around some of the regulation. I think that's interesting though. I haven't found a regulator that can really talk intelligently about distributed control and multi-signature technology though. So it's a learning curve,
It's unknown right now whether like a multi-sig cosigner would have to comply with these sort of regulations. Big question mark.
I think multi-signature technology poses a lot of questions. But I think from a technology standpoint and from an entrepreneur's perspective, I think you're moving in the right direction, adopting that sort of technology.
And I would just say the regulators are naturally a conservative bunch. When they hear about these things, they're going to be like, whoa, let's explain that again, and we'll have to get back to you. And understanding because they feel a sense of duty or responsibility, the ones who are acting, as they should. And so it's great that everyone's innovating and developing all these new tools and new ways of doing things, but, it's like regulars are just now getting familiar with Bitcoin, and then you started throwing on like multi-sig and distributed dApps and all these other stuff, and it's just like blows their mind, sort of, you know? And when you blow a regular's mind, that's, you know, they're not gonna just give you a blessing because they don't understand it, you know?
All right, well, thank you panelists, thank you all for coming today.